Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. For most of modern military history, ground combat has been about sending people into places everyone knows are deadly and hoping a bit of training and a whole lot of luck are enough. Ukraine is quietly breaking that logic. While the world was watching drones fly and ships explode, Ukraine has been building something far less cinematic, far more consequential. A robotic ground force designed to go where soldiers should not. This is not science fiction, and it is not a prototype phase. Ukrainian unmanned ground vehicles are already replacing infantry in the most lethal parts of the battlefield. They carry supplies, evacuate wounded troops, storm bunkers, detonate fortifications, and hold positions for weeks without rest. And in doing so, Ukraine is rewriting how ground warfare will be fought everywhere else. So let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
While Russia continues to rely on manpower to absorb losses, Ukraine is systematically removing people from the most dangerous parts of the battlefield and replacing them with machines. According to Ukrainian developers, nearly 15,000 ground robots were delivered to the military in 2025 alone, with higher numbers planned for 2026. Ground robotic vehicles, once experimental, are now a routine part of frontline operations. They deliver ammunition, food and water to positions where driving a vehicle would almost certainly result in casualties. Recently, they've also been engaging Russian forces directly. This shift reflects a simple calculation. Ukraine does not have the manpower reserves that Russia does. Ukrainian units therefore rely on remotely operated vehicles that can be replaced if destroyed. By contrast, Russian units still use motorcycles, quad bikes, and even animals to move supplies forward. The capabilities of these Ukrainian systems are also expanding. In December last year, a Ukrainian ground combat robot armed with a heavy machine gun ambushed a Russian armored vehicle in poor weather conditions, destroying it and neutralizing the assault group. Analysts described the incident as the first documented case of a ground robot destroying armored equipment in live combat. Most missions remain logistical or medical, but armed systems are becoming more common as Russian forces adapt and attempt to target uncrewed vehicles. Ukrainian units are now deploying robots designed to hold ground, monitor approaches, and engage targets over extended periods.
And now we're zoning in on the east-flanking portion of our show. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 did more than redraw Europe's security map. It also transformed Ukraine into one of the world's most innovative defense producers. Since the war began, Ukraine's defense sector has grown by roughly 350%, driven by urgent battlefield needs and rapid technological adaptation. Let's take a closer look at how Ukraine's defense sector adapted to the war.
Drone warfare is at the center of Ukraine's military transformation. Ukraine now leads globally in the development and deployment of both tactical and long-range drones. The next phase is already underway. Artificial intelligence-enabled drones designed to operate with minimal human input. These systems are expected to replace single-operator platforms, increasing speed, coordination and survivability on the battlefield. This growth has been supported by multiple new state-backed initiatives. These programs also connect Ukrainian defense startups with Western investors and allow NATO partners to test new weapons in real combat conditions. The result is unusually fast feedback and integration, shortening the path from development to deployment. Ukraine's advantage lies in scale and cost. Low-cost, rapidly produced systems, including AI-driven drones, robotic ground vehicles and long-range missiles, have proven capable of destroying far more expensive Russian equipment. This asymmetric approach is reshaping modern warfare. Beyond Ukraine itself, the implications are European. Ukrainian-made systems are battle-tested, interoperable with NATO, and affordable. As Europe accelerates rearmament, Ukraine is emerging not just as a frontline state, but as a central pillar of Europe's future security architecture.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Russia's full-scale invasion was supposed to break Ukraine through mass attrition and fear. Instead, it turned Ukraine into the world's most advanced laboratory for unmanned warfare. First, in the air, then at sea, and now, increasingly, on the ground. Unmanned ground vehicles, or UGVs, have moved from experimental curiosities to core battlefield tools. Ukraine is no longer testing whether robots can fight. It is testing how many human soldiers can be removed from the most dangerous task without losing combat effectiveness. The answer, so far, is more than anyone expected. The modern frontline is defined by what Ukrainian soldiers describe as kill zones, stretching 5 to 30 miles deep. Any vehicle that moves is detected, targeted and destroyed. This has made traditional logistics, infantry assaults and Medevac operations catastrophically expensive in terms of human life. Now, UGVs exist precisely for this type of environment. You see, they do not freeze, they do not bleed, and crucially, they do not need to be rotated out. Ukraine's advantage is in the breadth of its experience. Ukrainian UGVs are designed, modified and redeployed based on real combat feedback, often within weeks. That is why Ukraine is now leading globally in NATO-certified ground robotic systems, with dozens already codified and hundreds more under development. These machines perform roles that used to be divided between infantry, engineers, and armored vehicles. Some conduct reconnaissance and ambushes, lying in wait for Russian troops who have learned to fear drones from above but are still unprepared for robots firing from ground level. Others act as mobile fire support platforms, equipped with machine guns or grenade launchers, capable of holding a position for over a month without relief. Then there are the expendable systems. Heavy UGVs packed with explosives crawl toward bunkers, bridges or tanks and self-detonate. They force Russian units to defend in 3 dimensions simultaneously: air, sea in some sectors, and now ground robotics. Logistics may be where UGVs matter most. Nearly half of current UGV usage is non-combat, delivering food, water, ammunition, fuel and medical supplies across terrain where trucks simply cannot survive. Medevac is even more revealing. Russia largely abandons its wounded. Ukraine does not. Armored UGVs now extract wounded troops from positions where helicopters cannot fly and ambulances would be hunted down. Soldiers survive because a machine, not a human driver, made the journey. Ukraine's ground robots shift risks away from people and onto machines, which is exactly where modern militaries will increasingly want it. Russia set out to exhaust Ukraine through mass casualties. Instead, it forced Ukraine to invent a way of fighting that makes mass casualties unnecessary. This is not the end of infantry, but it is the end of thinking that soldiers must always be the first ones through the door. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Taras Kuzio, Professor of Political Science at the National University of the Kiev-Mohyla Academy. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me.
So let's talk about the way in which Ukraine has achieved the position it has now when it comes to unmanned warfare, basically, because we're not just talking about drones anymore, we're talking about ground-based systems as well. And according to many, Ukraine is now at the very forefront of this type of warfare. So how did it happen?
Well, I think there's probably a number of factors involved. Firstly, you have Ukraine inheriting its expertise from the Soviet Union and from the post-Soviet era. You have a great tradition of engineering, kind of military-industrial complex. In the Soviet Union, 40% of Ukraine's economy was the military sector. Ukraine had the biggest factory in the world in the Cold War, which produced nuclear weapons. So there's a lot of expertise there. Ukraine, even today, has a really high-level IT sector. And then what you had on top of that, you had the physical need, and you are fighting an existential war. Since 2022, you needed to innovate very quickly on the battlefield. And then I think another factor is also the Danish model, as it was called, which is now being replicated by other countries, where instead of sending weapons from the West, financial means would be sent to Ukraine, and this would be used to build up Ukraine's defense sector, and it gives jobs to Ukrainians, of course, but it's far less of a problem of security because you're not transporting weapons, you're building them in Ukraine. So today, there are different estimates, but something like 50 to 60% of Ukrainian weapons are produced domestically. This, of course, makes Ukraine very different from 2022, when the United States was very important. That's no longer the case. And in terms of the drones, air drones, sea drones, and ground drones, probably close to 100% of those are produced domestically.
And that's a remarkable leap, isn't it? You know, a leap in terms of not just technology, but also philosophy, because most of these companies are actually small to medium-sized enterprises, and they operate in a very different environment, an environment in which bureaucracy has been essentially phased out, and in which it's no longer the question of, politicians saying, okay, so this weapon type is going to be useful, and, it will look good in pictures. No, it's the army making direct orders for what they need specifically at the given time, and the industry responding at a remarkable pace.
Well, this is one of the factors that makes Ukraine so different from Russia. Russia still has the Soviet-style military-industrial complex, huge factories, bureaucracy, which makes everything very slow. Ukraine has anything up to 500 private defense companies. There are still one or two state, but primarily defense companies. These are relatively small. They specialize. They have direct links to certain military units. Their government cannot allow bureaucracy to get in the way because it's important that Ukraine stays ahead in innovation. And let's remember one important driver here is that Ukraine's population is much smaller than Russia's. So Ukraine uses the drones to reduce its rate of casualties. Russia doesn't care about casualties, as we know. And Ukraine is helping with that. It's increasing the monthly casualty rate from 30 to 35,000, hopefully to 50,000. Excuse me. Ukraine can't allow that. So using drones, using technology helps to preserve Ukrainian lives as well.
So ground drones have been a part of this innovation, something that really wasn't there on the battlefield like a year or 2 years ago. So this is completely uncharted territory, one in which Ukraine is pioneering various solutions. Can you tell us more about the latest achievements when it comes to essentially putting robots first and infantry second, at least in terms of exposure to danger?
Well, Ukraine pioneered, firstly, sea drones. Ukraine, which had its navy stolen by Russia, managed to destroy a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet and force it to move from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. And now Ukraine is pioneering in ground drones, or some people call them robots. These are very important because in the battle zone, there is what is called a kill zone, which can be 20 to 30 kilometers wide, where traditional forms of warfare like tanks, trucks, armored personnel carriers cannot operate. They will be destroyed straight away. And so you can transport food, medical kit, water, fuel to small units near the front line. That's one important aspect. You can also use these ground drones to take away wounded soldiers. Some of them are built with capsules where the soldier crawls inside and it protects them from attacks. I mean, Ukraine, like NATO armies, retrieves its wounded. Russia doesn't retrieve its wounded, it allows them to die. The ground drones are also, of course, as you say, important because they can lead the attack, as it were. They can do the really difficult, dirty work at the beginning, where most of the casualties happen. And then the ground forces move behind them to do what's called mopping up operations. You know, anybody who's left, wounded or killed can be dealt with by those Ukrainian soldiers. But it's saving Ukrainian lives by doing this. And I think this aspect of use of ground drones for military operations and for protecting forward units in this kill zone will be increased. Because until now it's primarily logistics, wounded, and a little bit of just last week, the first occasion where Russian soldiers, I think it was either 3 or 5, surrendered to a ground drone. They did not know this was a machine. They surrendered because of it was shooting at them, and then they realized it was a ground drone, and by the time they realized this, Ukrainian soldiers had arrived.
So this effectively also shows flexibility, that you can use a drone, either a flying one or a ground-based one, to spot a soldier, to notice that he's willing to surrender and accept his surrender. Now, let's talk about the limitations and how to overcome them. Do you think that within the next coming months and years, artificial intelligence will make it possible for drones to operate with less and less input from human operators, and also to negotiate difficult terrain? I'm talking in particular to developments regarding so-called physical models, so artificial intelligence which can negotiate an environment that was not really programmed into it, but which is totally new. So it understands physics and knows how to overcome difficulties which it encounters along the way.
Yes, I mean, all of those areas. I'm not a specialist in AI military technology, but certainly what you're talking about is, of course, at the cutting edge, and what Ukraine will try to exploit. Again, it helps Ukraine, which has a smaller manpower pool than Russia, and is more concerned about casualties when Russia is not. So that's important. The idea would be with air drones, that you are sending not 1 or 2, but you are sending a swarm of air drones, say 100. And you know that you expect maybe 20, 30, 40% will be shot down, but at least 50, 60% will get through. And these will be sent by operators, but then they will become automatic in flight. And then there will be no way of jamming the signal between those drones and the operators, because there is no signal. They are operating remotely. And that is the future, and Ukraine is at the cutting edge of that, and there will be different sizes of those types of drones. Of course, the smaller ones for Russian soldiers and for small pieces of Russian military equipment, and then the larger ones for military bases, for Russian air defense, and for Russian military factories. So this is all happening. Ukraine knows it has to stay ahead of Russian innovation, because the Russians are always trying to catch up. And I think where the positive aspect of this is that now we have a lot of European countries who have followed the Danish model. You know, Finland, Sweden, Poland, Britain are following the Danish model in providing Ukraine with financial support for military innovation, but also jointly producing goods. So, for example, Britain is jointly producing with Ukraine interceptors for Russian drones. And all of this cooperation helps both sides. It helps, of course, Ukraine, obviously, but it also helps to bring European members of NATO from the 20th into the 21st century. Because, you know, until a few years ago, most NATO, or all NATO armies, including the US, were actually 20th century armies. And now the Ukrainian battlefield is showing how the 21st century war is completely changing, completely different.
So essentially, Ukraine is beta testing the future of battle. Unfortunately, it's on its own soil, but hopefully the benefits of that will be powerful enough to keep Russia at bay in the future. Professor Taras Kuzia was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And now we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Russia's confirmed military death toll in Ukraine continues to climb. Independent journalists have now identified more than 168,000 Russian soldiers killed, based on publicly verifiable sources such as obituaries, regional reporting, and statements from local authorities.
Thousands of new names have been added in recent weeks alone, and researchers stress that the true number of deaths is likely far higher. The confirmed fatalities include large numbers of volunteers, mobilized troops, and prisoners recruited from penal colonies. Parallel estimates from Western analysts and Ukrainian military sources suggest Russia's total casualties may exceed 1 million since 2022, that is killed and wounded. Despite these losses, Moscow has continued limited battlefield advances by replenishing units with new contract soldiers.
Ukraine says SpaceX has begun implementing countermeasures to prevent Russian attack drones from exploiting the Starlink satellite network, following a direct request from Kiev. Ukrainian officials report that the first effects are already visible and are aimed at protecting civilians, military units, and critical infrastructure.
While technical details remain undisclosed, the measures come after confirmation that Russian forces have been integrating Starlink terminals into multiple strike drone types. SpaceX has publicly indicated that the initial steps appear to be working and that further actions are possible. As part of the next phase, Ukraine will introduce mandatory verification of Starlink terminals, allowing only authorized and registered devices to operate in the country, with unverified terminals set to be disconnected.
Polish authorities say Russia's security services were behind a wave of cyber attacks that hit the country's energy infrastructure last December. According to investigators, the attacks targeted dozens of renewable energy facilities, a manufacturing company, and a combined heat and power plant supplying nearly 500,000 people.
Polish officials say the operation was deliberately destructive rather than aimed at long-term espionage. Attackers attempted to irreversibly damage data and systems at the power plant, though security software prevented the most severe outcome. The activity has been linked by Polish authorities to a hacking group associated with Russia's Federal Security Service. Officials warned the incident signals an escalation in tactics, from probing and preparation to attempts at direct disruption.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.